So I thought I'd make a video ranking from worst to best the mainstream gachas power creep. Now the four games I will be using here are the four games I've at minimum played in the past. Genshin, HSR, ZZZ, and Wuwa. So without any more bullshit, let's get straight into it. In the worst and last place for having egregious power creep is HSR, right? I have made many videos talking about how people over exaggerate the power creep to the point they say that if you don't have a newest character or you pulled a character 2 to 3 patches ago, you are already fucked in terms of clearing the endgame content. That's really just insanely over exaggerated and a complete lie that mainly tribalists use when they're trying to have like agenda wars against each other, right? However, nonetheless, it doesn't change that there is for sure significant power creep in this game, especially compared to the rest of these. To be honest, HSR is in its own league, right? Genuinely, it's in its own fucking league in terms of power creep as compared to these other three, which is pretty insane to say, but it just is the truth, right? Keep in mind, power creep has nothing to really do with endgame shilling or, being able to clear endgame content. It's just how much stronger some characters are compared to the older ones and how this pattern keeps going, right? Like, how egregious is it really? For example, Wuwa will actually go out of their way to debuff a lot of teams if they aren't the newest team. However, that doesn't really count as power creep in this case, at least for my criteria personally, right? So, number one worst game in terms of power creep is HSR, so it's going in fourth. For third place, I'm choosing Wuwa. I already know this is going to get a ton of people riled up. No fucking way, right? No fucking way it's Wuwa. Let me explain, right? Wuwa, actually blatantly has the most power creep as compared to both ZZZ and Genshin. Now, depending on the way you see it, you can put Wuwa above ZZZ, because ZZZ had one massive surge of power creep at the beginning. However, since then, everybody at max is Miyabi level. There isn't really anyone that exceeds Miyabi significantly. Like, none of that really exists. So Miyabi has stayed as like this really strong Void Hunter DPS that still hasn't really necessarily been surpassed, right? And so because of this, I don't actually think ZZZ's power creep in probably the last year, well, it doesn't even exist in a lot of, like, it doesn't really exist at all. She's just still one of the strongest, if not the strongest, and then she also has one of the best free-to-play teams, and she's one of the most easiest to play as compared to something like Yixuan. So genuinely, like, ZZZ has done an amazing job of handling the power creep and basically just making Void Hunter characters the cap at power, right? That's why I have ZZZ in second as compared to Wuwa in third. For those who don't know, even though it's commonly used argument in Wuwa that power creep doesn't exist, power creep doesn't matter, you could make that argument when it comes to just clearing endgame content, but when you just look at character power creep, it is actually pretty significant in Wuwa as compared to what a lot of people think. Back in 1.x, our first strongest DPS in the game was, of course, Jian, right? After this, it was Jinshi. After this, it was Camellia. After this, it was Carlotta. After this, it was Zanny. After this, it was Cartethia. And as of current, because of getting even further buffed from Chisa, at least when you have her weapon, Cartethia's S0R1 premium team is significantly stronger, even as compared to the strongest team back in 1.x, which was Cammy's, right? For those who don't know, Cammy back in 1.x did like 1.3 or 1.4 million damage per rotation. Currently, Cartethia in her premium team does a little more than 2.1 million, which is an over 50% increase. And this is considering that if you actually do smart investment, you would never actually go for Chisa. It'd be much better if you went for her S2, and if you do this, then Cartethia actually becomes like 80% stronger, because she unlocks a new rotation in which small Cartethia's plunges do an absurd amount of fucking damage, right? Now, an 80% damage increase for Cartethia herself does not mean an 80% damage increase for the entire team across the board. However, it would probably make her at minimum like 50% stronger team-wide, and that would just completely blow out these 1.x teams by a mile. That would put her in the 3 million per rotation damage mark, which is over twice as strong as compared to a premium Jinshi team or a premium Camellia team, let's say, but at the same cost, right? Which is absolutely fucking bonkers, right? So in my opinion, Wuwa does have significant power creep, and they do have a new strongest DPS pretty consistently every 4 to 5 patches, I'd say. However, it isn't HSR level, and plus Wuwa has the better banner pity, and you can buy sequences in shops. So at the end of the day, there are ways to combat it, right? Next, we have ZZZ. I kind of spoiled my reasoning for ZZZ earlier, but because they haven't really power crept Miyabi much at all since her release, and it seems like with Ye Shunguang, that's probably still going to continue to be the case, even if Ye Shunguang is slightly better. I have to say, they've been handling it the absolute best, even if from what I've heard, the shilling can be very annoying and nitpicky at times. That's why I have ZZZ in second above Wuwa. It hasn't really replaced Miyabi and had a new definitive best DPS over her for quite a long fucking time now, right? Moving on, we have first place, the game with the least power creep, Genshin. Now, I took a long break from Genshin, even though it was my introduction to like this gacha game space when I was younger. And from what I'd seen from, you know, coming back to Wuwa and seeing people make comparisons, back when HSR and Genshin players were at it every day making comparisons too, I thought Genshin's power creep was actually much more egregious. However, instead, what I came to the realization of is that Genshin players, like, idea of power creep is basically what HSR does every 2 to 3 patches, except for Genshin, it's within the span of like multiple years. Okay, Genshin's power creep, at least like compared to HSR from what I'm used to, feels fucking non-existent. Okay, it's there, it exists, but it's like such a non-issue in my opinion, and you can make an entirely different argument for shilling. I don't know what's going on with the endgame shilling in Genshin, right? However, when it just comes to power creep, genuinely, this game is the GOAT. In fact, out of all these games, they have the most usable 4-stars. They have the most usable 4-star weapons. They also like buff older 4-stars, and they're buffing older characters currently with like Mondstadt buffs, Heinz Rickle buffs. On top of this, apparently Leeway characters are also planned for a buff soon, which means Hu Tao should become stronger, who is one of my favorite characters in the game. I've heard they made fucking Razor a stronger DPS than my Raiden Shogun, who, by the way, I pulled her weapon right before I took a break from Genshin last time, which is pretty depressing, right? But nonetheless, this kind of goes to show you, Genshin has the least power creep out of all these games, and I'd argue that like it really isn't close. And the reason I'm giving it first over ZZZ, even though ZZZ technically has no power creep after Miyabi, is mainly because Genshin is half a decade old. Okay, ZZZ isn't even 2 years old yet. Wuwa isn't 2 years old either. HSR is the only other one who's like 2.5 years old. So Genshin, being at minimum twice as old as some of the games on here, seems to have the most slow power creep, be the most open to buffing older characters, and as well the most open to releasing 4 stars, actually making them good and viable for endgame content and new teams, which just has absolutely insane levels of value. I mean, bro, how does Bennett still have the value that he does after all this fucking time? It's insanity to me, and I'm glazing this game, or it sounds like glaze, but keep in mind, Genshin is easily my least favorite out of all these gacha games, and the one I'm least likely to ever come back to. But I just can't lie. This game has been doing an amazing fucking job at making sure older characters and cheap characters like 4 stars and cheap weapons like 4-star weapons are genuinely usable, if not meta, right? So let me know what your guys' thoughts is down in the comments. I know this will probably incite some tribalist war, whatever, in the comments, but I think I bring up some very, very good points here. Love you all. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great night, and peace out.